right? It's been wild. It's been back and forth, both with internet connectivity issues, the kind they don't make a pill for, as well as the fact that the chess on the board has been just sporadic and odd. So let's see what happens. As we dive in here, I'm like everyone else waiting for Fabiano Caruana to get his first win in the SCC against Magnus in a long time. In fact, let's just throw out a diamond membership, maybe a poll in chat or something. 1-year diamond for whoever predicts correctly which game Fabi will get his first win. Because I'm going on record. It's happening, Amon. Whoever guesses the game gets a diamond membership. Even if we got to do multiple diamond memberships. Let's do it.
And it's what? So we're in game number 5 right now. Okay,
yeah, game 5. So predict the correct game, and we'll give you a diamond membership. That'll be fun. And hopefully, like 1,000 people don't predict it, because then Eric might be like, "Oh, that's a little too many diamond memberships." But hey, it's the holiday season. Let's go.
Yeah, I think anytime you're in November, you always think ahead to the holidays. So you're clearly in the spirit. I'm going to go ahead and bet the exact opposite right now. I don't think that it's going to be this game. I don't know whether that's a bold prediction or not, but usually Black needs to play Fabi in this case for a move like f6, because if you don't include f6, it looks really tough, to deal with g3, h4, h5. Imagine that knight going back to h8. I mean, that is just terrible. So looking at that, I'm feeling like f6 has to be, there we go, immediately played, and it's just necessary in order to free those pieces.
But the weakness on e6 is now the big storyline, right? The problem with f6 is it's a pawn you sometimes wish you had back, and you wish it was guarding e6. So Magnus immediately relocating the knight, maybe coming to this side of the board, but you have to keep an eye on this e6 pawn now if you're Fabi.
Yep. And it almost resembles a little bit like, that classic French structure here. And that's not an opening that you'd really expect. This did start as a Sicilian, so I just want to mention that. But we're kind of back into what you'd see more in the French. Normally, you're all pretty happy to play against this as white, but the engine is reasonably happy, reasonably satisfied with what Fabi has got here, which is a little bit to my surprise as well.
Yeah, I mean, white has a teeny bit of an edge, but you're right. It's not that bad. I was going to say, the problem with these positions is the only way to get rid of e6 is to play e5, and then the d pawn becomes the biggest weakness after that. But you're kind of all in, because once you start with f6 to get you the space that you talked about, then you kind of got to deal with e6, and at that point, you kind of got to deal with d5. And so Black wants to open these positions and kind of, if you had your way, you'd just take everything off the board and be equal again. But this is going to get double-edged and very sharp with the d pawn and this diagonal here.
I think there's already a pawn maybe to be taken. Like, I'm pretty sure that bishop takes g6 there, followed by pawn takes e5, was going to win the d pawn by force. It's just you would have to give up your light squared bishop in the process. So maybe, not the most desirable. I could see maybe a slower approach here where you almost want to play bishop c2, bishop b3, knight d4, like just slowly build the game up. No rush to take that d pawn. Instead, just apply the pressure. So I like it for Magnus, but maybe I think the engine was reacting to the possibility of just winning that d pawn outright there.
If we want, we can show that line. And for those wondering why the pawn was hanging, it's because if you take on g6, you also have the ability to take c8 at the end of the variation. So just to quickly show it, at the end of something like this, maybe this isn't the exact move order because you could have taken f3. The point is there's this. Okay, so what is the exact move order? Because this would have been much worse.
Yeah, I think Black is incentivized to throw in rook takes c1, whereas, white is trying to make sure they don't allow knight takes on f3. So I was thinking takes on g6, and then takes on e5, and then take on c8. But it comes at the cost of those doubled f pawns on f3. So it's like, you see that trade-off there. It's not an easy decision to make, right?
Yeah, and definitely something that I think we can understand why Magnus didn't go for it. In fact, probably would have been better for Fabi. So instead we have the long-term isolated queen pawn feature where this pawn is weak, but it's not currently being attacked or targeted in any way. So Fabi is maintaining comfy equality.
Yeah, I'll say maybe equality. I don't know about comfy. it does feel like a position I'd maybe rather play for white, but not by a lot. And mainly because the knight on e5 has two moves which kind of bother me after, let's say, bishop takes d7, queen d7, which is knight c4 and knight g4. And if I could play b3 and h3, I think I might feel a little bit better. And so I'm imagining that white wants to, put this rook on d1 or queen on d2, but you always have to watch these knight jumps because the f2 pawn can be loose and the b2 pawn can be loose. And those two come under fire with knight c4 and knight g4, not to mention here, knight d3, big consideration.
Yeah, well, the rook goes to d1 to guard knight d3. Knight c4 would not be possible because the queen could just take it, just to point out the pin. I was going to say, do you worry about the a7 pawn at some point? And I guess Fabi answers that like, I'm going to back up the knight. That a7 pawn could have been stolen if you weren't careful, maybe.
Yep, agree. That's the classic move that you're like, he's not going to do it. And then you allow it, and then he does it, and you're like, you're regretting everything. I've been there. The regret is never worth it.
So he goes to c6, won't regret losing that pawn. Now Magnus has to figure out how he wants to put pressure on d5. There's some different ways to do it, but the thing about an isolated pawn is, by definition, there's no other pawns around it, which it can push and advance, sometimes aggressively. So if Magnus loosens his control over the d4 square, Fabi might just push the pawn, and then it's extra guarded.
Yep, queen to c5. Hits the d pawn, does come at the expense of dropping the b pawn. And so I guess the standard, or definitely the simplest move, is just to occupy the square in front of the isolated pawn, a tale as old as time. This is how you're always taught to play against it. If everything exchanges on d4, we're going to see the white queen back up the rook with queen d2 and just full pressure on the d5 pawn. Now, you're not winning the pawn because black can always defend with rook d8. You're never really going to win this pawn, but you can tie the pieces down so that it's always up to you when you want to relinquish that pressure and place it elsewhere, with the hope, I guess, that you can do that and maneuver more effectively than your opponent from side to side.
Yeah. Well said. We may end up getting exactly that type of major piece endgame. Okay, not quite yet. Fabi plays rook e8. I expect Magnus to deal with his back rank at some point here. You don't want tactics like that to hang in the air for too long.
I agree. Yeah, would have even thought about it right there. H3, for example, but queen e2 definitely with a similar idea. H3, bishop back to c3.
Yeah, now I think Fabi, okay, he doesn't go for it. I was going to say at some point you have to decide if you want that major piece endgame, because the bishop, I think, is better than the knight if you're in a spot where you can target things on both sides of the board. So at the same time, what Fabi's saying is, if you move this bishop, I'm going to push this pawn, and it might be isolated, but it is passed. And here we go. We're going to see exactly that type of line.
Yeah, so f3, rook e6, or rook e5, I suppose. Maybe rook e5, so you can play rook d5.
I like that.
I'm assuming is going to be played at rook takes e3, a similar tactic that you mentioned earlier, where you can just take the rook on e3 because of the loose queen on d7. And definitely an achievement to get that pawn from d5 to d4. You have to be very happy as Fabi. Magnus is not, I wouldn't say he's concerned, but he's got, 37 seconds, and he knows that's an achievement for Fabi here.
d3, interesting move. I was going to say that I'm surprised Fabi didn't go for what you said. I think the rook just felt better on a light square on d5. Now the rook actually can't go to d6. So we'll see what happens here with the d3 pawn being targeted. Now that you play king f1, you will take this pawn the next move.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing, this rook e6, because it feels good to put the rook on a light square. So rook e6 makes sense because it's a light square. But the destination was actually the d file. And so you wanted to go on a dark square initially to end up on a light square permanently.
Yeah, there you go. The tale as old as time. You got to go off the road to get back on the other road. I don't even know if that's a tale, but all right. Bishop to g3 played. It's going to come to f2. And I'm liking Magnus's chances more and more. Although note that Fabi is up on time for the first time in time pressure that I think we've seen.
Yeah, it's actually really relinquished, though, because he had a minute and a half. Now it's evening up. We might see queen to c3 as opposed to queen takes d3, just as a method of maybe trying to protect and conserve the b pawn and knowing that you'll win the other pawn eventually.
Rook e2 kind of forces the issue. You're going to get
Yeah.
queen takes d3, and at the end, black picks up the b2 pawn. That's exactly what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, the black pieces are to be preferred because you will have a queenside pass pawn, but the bishop is to be preferred over the knight, any type of endgame where you've got pressure maybe on both sides of the board. So this is super balanced, and I still think anyone's game in time pressure.
Yeah, if that knight moves, there's either rook takes g7 or just bishop e5, and there's going to be problems.
Yeah, nice tactic. Nice spot there. The knight moves. You've got big time issues on e5. The bishop is immediately threatening to go to c3. Fabi says no.
Mm-hmm. Also hitting the a pawn, like rook d5, becomes more of a consideration. And I would say that a pawn is maybe less of a concern compared to the g pawn. Like I do think you station the rook on maybe a7, and I think there's much more to play for Magnus. Not a lot, but I prefer it.
Yep. No, agreed. And this was kind of what we predicted. When the bishop and rook get together against targets on both sides of the board, good things happen. And so Magnus will be the one who's up a pawn. Will it be enough, right? The knight is typically a good defensive piece once you can get things to just one area of the board. Yeah, Magnus leaned in a little frustrated there with his own kind of choice.
Yeah, I think he could have preserved the pawns. Like, you could have played h4, g3 and just kind of got them to a safe square first. He hasn't done it in the best way, and as a result, I guess it's a bit more drawish, because if you're going to take, I was going to say, if you're going to take this pawn, you have to trade rooks, but he actually found a way to keep the rook on the board, so credit to Magnus.
He did, and now both sides are literally living off the increment, so nice to see, knock on wood, that right now, no further internet issues for Fabi, and I did knock on wood, so don't blame me for a commentator's curse. Seems to be good. Doesn't seem to be having any issues, but will he defend? Will the knight be able to hold?
Yeah, this looks like a position that's quite comfortable. Ooh, knight d5. I guess you go into the rook endgame now, and that's a little bit easier.
Should be easier to hold, although I would not put it past Magnus to swindle one. He squeezes water out of stones for a living. He's been doing it for years. We'll see if he can. Let's see if he. What? Eval bar.
G5. You're supposed to play rook to the 5th rank there in order to prevent this move, or maybe rook f4, but he just allows g5, and this is exactly that.
No, it was rook f7. Yeah, Magnus missed rook f7. That was the win. Now we're back to a draw.
Oh my goodness, what is going on in this one? It just shows you how tough these endgames are.
Yeah, seriously. It's really hard to even explain what
He's
move
got to abandon these, right?
Honestly.
Oh, the repetition. Oh no. That is going, I don't think he intended